Okay, good morning and welcome to Yeshiva YouTube, just Daf It. We're glad to have you with us, with me. And we're starting today Nazir Daf Dalit, number 24. And we are finishing today Nazir Daf Dalit, number 24. Let's get started. The Mishnah, second line of Chav Dalit and Aleph. Aisha Shanaja ben Nazir, she took a Nazirus upon herself, and Frisha es behemta. Right? At the conclusion of your Nazirus, even if you don't become Tmeya, let's say a stam is just 30 days, you bring three karbonos, chatas, ola, and a shlamim. Those are the three karbonos. She separated an animal. You can see this is the chata she separated. Before she had a chance to complete her Naziris, her husband was made for the Naziris. He annulled it or he blocked the Naziris. If the animal that she separated actually belonged to him, she has no power to separate an animal that belongs to him because whatever possessions a woman owns, generally the husband owns that also. So therefore, it was never hektish, and therefore it can go back and graze as part of the flock. If, however, she, the woman, we'll see in the Gemara how she had owned the animal. She owned the animal, chatas tamos. So the chatas is sent to die, meaning you let it graze until it dies, and when it dies, it dies, This is similar to a person who is chayav chatas and he dies. The Gemara we learned earlier compares it to chatas shemesu ba'aleh. Let's say you violated malacha on Shabbos, b'shogeg, and then you separate a chatas and then you die. So chatas shemesu ba'aleh, obviously the chatas is only mechaper for you, not for your inheritors. So therefore, you let it die. Similar over here, this hafara. So in some ways, we learn probably the way it wears ma'akar akar or miklish kalish. It weaken the power of her words. So therefore, it's similar to Chatash Mesubele and as Talmud. We'll talk more about this exactly how Chatash Mesubele is a little different than Hafara. There'll be an Afkamina, Machlokas Rishonim, about a specific detail about one of the Korbanos, the Korban Shlamim. We'll talk about in a second. The Ola, Tikarev Ola. Right? If she separated an Ola, the Chatas died. If she separated an Ola, right? And then her husband was made for the nether, and it belonged to her. So the ola to karav ola, the ola is bought as a carbon ola. Now we'll see. I'll explain why it's bought as a carbon ola. The simple explanation is that because, like I'm going to explain more in Enoch Ben Zion, which is the Ian share, Amen and Ian share on every daf, because it's not exactly like she died because she didn't die, and Havar Sadar is not like Hatar Sadarim where you completely remove the nether. It's blocking the nether. It weakens the nether b'shas amira when she said it. So, but it is sort of a nazirus that she's makabel beliba, like a shvua, right? And she acts out her nazirus. So there is an aspect of nazirus still extant, still there, even though he was made for it. So the ola is brought as an ola. Shlam dekarav shlam. Karman shlam is brought as a shlam. Benechal liyom echad ve'enatun and lechem. It's eaten for one day. Normally, a regular shlam is eaten for 2 days and one night. Here, the shlam of a nazir is only eaten for 1 day and one night, and similarly, it has the din of a nazir, right? That's why it has the din of a nazir. It's only eaten for 1 day and one night. Ve'enatun and lechem. You don't bring lechem, even though the shlam of a nazir is accompanied by bread, loaves of bread, special lechem. I think 40 loaves of bread for a nazir. The only 2 times you have this by a carbon toda and by a nazir. A nazir wouldn't bring it in this case because that's really one of the avodas you do with the bread is you wave it, and she's not completing her naziros. Her naziros is batal, it's gone. She's not completing naziros. So there's no point in having the bread. Hayula mo stumin. Let's say she didn't actually designate a carbon, but she set aside money to purchase karbanos. So she had a bunch of money, right? And she didn't specify how much of it is for the chatas, ola, and shlamim. Maybe all the money could be used for a shlamim, or all the money for ola and chatas. She didn't specify what it is. Yibla in the dava. That money is used for karbanos ola, a karban ola in a dava, which is bought miketza mizbeach when the mizbeach does not have karbanos on it. It's nice they always have karbanos in the mizbeach. So you bring olas in a dava. Most before Russian, however, again, this money has to belong to her. We'll explain how it belongs to her. Most before Russian, if she specified money, this money is for a chatas, this money is for all, this money is for a shlamim. So, dmei chatas yelchol yam melach, like mei chatas, like we said before, the animal has to die. So here you throw the money into the Dead Sea. Lo nen v'lo molin, right? There's no me'ilah because it's not really Moses of Achatas because she died, technically, because he was made for it. Seemingly like she died. Lo nenin, midrabanan, you can't be nena. There goes there, you can't be nena because it's similar to Korban Chatas. Dmei Ola Yaviu Ola. The money that's specified for an Ola, you bring an Ola. Molin Behem. And it seemingly has Kedusha's Ola of a Nazir, right? That's what's going on over here, because even though she died, and really the Nazir is Batal, he's made for the Nazir, it's not like completely dying. That's the point I want to bring out. And that's why for an Ola, for example, there's Me'ilah. There's Me'ilah because it's an Ola's Chova. And there's Me'ilah because Ola is Kach, and there's Me'ilah if someone would benefit from it, so they have to reimburse hektish and also pay a 1/5 penalty and bring a korban asham. Dmei shlamim yaviu shlamim. The money that you set for the shlamim, again, you bring a shlamim of a nazira. Again, it has the strictures of a korban shlamim of a nazir or nazira, and it's only even for one day and one night. But you don't bring bread. Practically, you can't bring bread. Now, there's a famous machlokas here in the Rambam and the Ri. There's one other difference between a korban shlamim, a regular korban shlamim, and the korban shlamim of a nazir, and that normally a korban shlamim, only the chazev shok. Chazev shok is the breast or the ribs, and the shok is part of the hind leg, right? The animal has 4 legs. So the right hind leg, that's the shok, that goes to the kohan. The rest of it is eaten by the owners. By the korban shlamim of a nazir, there's an additional leg which goes to the kohanim. That's the right foreleg, the right front leg. It's a machlokas over here in the case where he was made for the nazirus. Does this right foreleg still go to the kohanim, or does it go to Israel? The Ri says, it's quoted by the Rosh on Chavdalam and Beis. He says it must go to the Kohen also because it really has the kedusha of a korban of a nazira. The Rambam, however, maintains no. It's a voluntary shlamim, and therefore it can be eaten even by Yisrael. We'll talk more about this machlokes in here with Ben Sion. Whereas the Montana the Baal Mishtabidla, who is the author of our Mishnah, right? That says that if she separates a korban without it being hers, right? She mistama separated from her husband's animals, because whatever belongs to the woman belongs to the husband. So obviously our Mishnah holds that the husband's not responsible to bring korbanos for his wife. I'm Rav Chisa Rabbani is Rabbani. He is Hagadak Rav Yehuda. If you say it's Rav Yehudi, I might take it to Rabbi Eider. Why, in the case where she separated an animal for her husband's flock, why did it revert back to a status of no kedusha? Amishtabidla. He's obligated to provide korbanos for her. This on Rav Yehuda Omer. We had this Gemara in Masechet Nedarim. Other maybe korban asher al ishto. Right? If his woman is yoledis or something like that, or she sins or something like that, she has to bring a korban. So a lot of times, like a korban, like I believe yoledis, depends how rich you are. So if her husband's rich, right, she's considered poor because she doesn't have her own bank account. But whatever she owns belongs to her husband. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, part of the ksuba is obligating to bring her korbanos. He writes in the ksuba, whatever you're chayav, right, and this includes even korbanos that she was chayav before the marriage, as opposed to this is the only thing really that he's chayav for things that she did before the marriage, because he wants her to have kapara. So Rabbi Yehuda holds she brings the korban asher because he owes her that money. He has to pay for it. Rava Amar, Rava says, "Afilu temer Rabbi Yehuda." You could say our Mishnah even follows Rabbi Yehuda. Right? He takes upon himself to pay for korbanos that it's normal for her, to come in consequence with. For example, she gives birth or she doesn't have Veira unwittingly, so that's normal. But she doesn't have to take a Naziris upon herself, so he's not obligated in that. Ikada Amri, some say a different version of this discussion. Montana, who is the author of Mishnah, Amar of Chista, Rav Chista is Rabbi Yehuda. He is Rabbi Yehuda. The Chim Shap, the love of Milsa, the Shrichla, Milsa, the Shrichla, right? Must be Rabbi Yehuda, and he, even over here, even though it's Rabbi Yehuda, normally he is chayav, but he's on, by a Nazir, he's not chayav because she did not take this upon herself, so he's not meshub, but he's not obligated to pay for a korban. The Rabban, if you want to say our Mishnah follows the Rabban, Rav Chitza says, Lo meshab laklal. There's no question. He never has to pay for any of her korbanos, whether it's yoledes or a chata. She doesn't have to pay for any of her korbanos. So what, according to the Rabbanan, what must be the case, right? That he has to pay for it. It could go into Akni Allah. Must be talking about a case in the Mishnah, the first case in the Mishnah, where he took from her and she took from his animals, that he set aside. He gave her a present. A husband has the ability to say, okay, I'm giving some of my money to you, even though technically everything the wife owns belongs to the husband. He can set aside money for her, put it in her purse. Going to Akni Allah. Came on the Akni Allah, have it Nafsha. And once he gives it to her, right? So even though it came from him, but now it belongs to her. So it shouldn't go back, shouldn't revert to a status of being not consecrated because it belonged to her. So it has to be Rabbi Yehuda. Rav Amar, at the top of Dalam Viz, Rav Amar, Fila Tamer Rabbanan. Rav rejects Rav Chisda's notion. He says, even the Rabbanan, Ki Makni La Nami, Milsa the Srichla, Milsa the Srichla Lo Makni La, even when he sets aside money for her personal use, which belongs to her, he's only Makni her money for things that she actually needs. It's not a necessity to become a Nazira. It's not a good thing to become a Nazira. So therefore, he didn't give her money for that, and actually can't use the money to buy karbanos, so therefore it reverts back to the status of not kadosh. Inshallah, I said behem ta'chatas tamos u'ol tikari. Himenola. Right. So the Gemara asks, the first case makes we understand, right? It belongs to the husband. It always belongs to the husband. So as the second case, it belongs to her. Where did she get it from? We have a famous concept. Whatever a woman acquires belongs to her husband. So Rav Papa says she's talking about a case where the husband, we learn he has to provide his wife with a certain amount of food, right? The wages of the woman belongs to the wages that a woman earns belongs to her husband. He has to provide mizonos for her. He has to provide a certain amount of food, and the Mishnah in Ksuvos actually, I believe on Samachet, discusses how much food he has to supply. So if she is on a diet, or she decides she wants to save up, so she doesn't eat all of her food, and she sells whatever is normal to eat, she eats the half of it, and she sells the rest of it, she has her own money. Another way of understanding this, the Akni La Acher, someone else gave her a present. Like we learned in the end of Mesachs Nedarim, right? Her father, right, when she's getting married, he can say, I want to give only this money to my daughter, and that her husband should not have reshus. Someone else gives him a tana, he can restrict the ownership to his daughter and not to her, because that's part of the stipulation of the gift. Shmuel don't sit down until you tell me this thing. Right? There must have been a teaching. There are 4 types of rams, right? The shlomim at the end of the Nazir is a ram, a 2-year-old ram. We know 4 cases. One where it belongs to him, one it belongs to her, one is after death, and one is after kapara. What are those 4 cases? You want him to explain them. Shalah hada amra. Shalah is our Mishnah, right? Our Mishnah where she somehow had ownership over the money, like we explained. When we get a present, or she didn't use all mizonos, she didn't eat everything, she was able to sell it to own her own money. And then the husband was made for her Naziris, so therefore that exactly our Mishnah. Shalo, this now. What is Gehish Shalo? Ha'ishman Madir as Beno Benazir. We're going to learn in the coming Mishnayos, a man has an ability to not just accept the Nazir upon himself, but also to force his son to become a Nazir. However, a woman can't do that to her son. So let's say, right, even though the father has the ability to force the Nazir upon his son, if the krovim, the relatives, have the ability to protest and say they don't want to, or the son could actually protest. We'll see the certain circumstances where the son could protest. So either he protests or the relatives protest, or gilach or shegilchu krovim means meaning they violated the Naziris, which is just another way of saying that they, right, when I force my son to take a Naziris and he rejects it by shaving his head, one of these terms of Naziris is not to shave the head. It's just an expression that he's mocha, and therefore it's not niskabel. The Naziris wasn't niskabel. So hayulo mo stumin. Let's say before he protested against the Naziris that his father accepted for him, If he had most when he set aside money, originally he was going to become a Nazir, and then he decided he doesn't want to. He rejected the notion. We'll see how old the son is when he can reject it in the coming Mishnayah. So, Hayula most and he set aside money, any unspecified money, Yipul and Adava. All that money falls for an Adava, for a carbon Adava, because technically the money could be all for a carbon Shlamim, for a carbon Shlamim. A carbon Shlamim is not Kachim Kachim, it's Kachim Kalim, so there's no Me'ila over there. And you can use it for an Adava. Most for Russian, if he specified this money is for an Ola, this is Chadazah, this is for Hashem, to make Chadas, the money of the Chadas, like we learned in the Mishnah, goes into the Yam HaMelech, because you can't loan nen and loan molin, right? Dmei Ola, it's similar to the Mishnah, right? Where you had an Nazirus and the husband was made for you. Here also, the son rejected the Nazirus. Dmei Ola, Yaviu Ola. Molin Behem. It remains an Ola, and there's Me'ila, because it's Kachik Kash. And they Shlam Yaviu Shlamim and Echal Niyam Echad and Tuin Lechem. Right? It has a din of Shlamim, but seemingly of a Nazir. And that's why I only eat it for 1 day and 1 night. But you don't bring Lechem because there's no completion of the Nazirus after 30 days. Shalachar Misa Minal, the third case, Shalachar Misa, what is that case? That these laws apply. The Tanya, Hamafresh Mos and Ziruso. He sets aside money for his own Naziros, so none of lo molin by head. Neishahen Ru'uyin, Lahayu Kulan Shlamim. He sets aside money for his own, he thinks the Naziros want himself, a man, and he sets aside money. So, you can, even if it's unspecified money, you can't get Me'ila for that, because Me'ila is only for Kachik Kachim, and it's possible this money could have been used for entirely to buy one nice animal for Shlamim. Mace, let's say the person dies before he completes his Naziris. Vayula Mo Stumin. He has money which are unspecified. Yipul Nadava, they're bought for Karban Olis Nadava on the Mizbeach, Kates and Mizbeach, dessert for the Mizbeach. Mos for Russian, money that was specified. Dmei is Yolich the Amamelech, you throw into the Dead Sea. Lo Nenev Molin. Like we explained, there's no Me'ila because he died. It loses most of its Kedusha. It's Me'ola, Yaviu Ola. However, the Ola, you have to bring an Ola for Molin Behen. And there's Me'ila. Dmei Shlamim, Yaviu Shlamim in Echal, Yom Echad, Einantun in Lechem. Again, like the same halachas said before. You bring a Karban Shlamim, it has partly a Kedusha as Nazir, even though he died, right? I'll explain why in Enoch Ben Sion, why, even though he died, there is still concept of zeros over here. Shlamim, that's why Shlamim is only in for 1 day. But Anatu and Lechem, you don't practically have to bring bread because there's no tenufa, there's no waving, there's no completion of zero. Shalach kapara, where do we know? Where do we have a Mishnah or a Brisa that tells us Shalach kapara, meaning he became a Nazir and he set aside money for a karbanos, and then he brought other animals, not from the money, from to Mechaper at the end of his Naziros, and he had money left over. Svaru, that's a svar, that's logical. Shalachar Misa Maitam. What's the reason if he died? Right, all these halachas applied. Lo chazi lekapara. Right, he died. He's not fit for kapara. He died. Shalachar kapara nami. Halo chazi lekapara. He already atoned for himself. He doesn't have to bring more atonement. So those are the 4 cases. The Gemara says v'suleika. There's no other cases where these halachas apply. V'ika v'sharkol shalmi nazir. We have a brisa which says all shalmi nazir shachtan shalom mitzvasam ksherim. A person who shechs a Shalmi Nazir, he completes his Naziris, and he shechs the Shalakum Mitzvahsan. Most people explain Shalakum Mitzvahsan. I mean, when he had in mind the Shechita, the person who was Shochet, the person who slaughtered the animal, had in mind this for Korban Ola, not for Korban Shlamim. It's kosher, like we learned in the beginning of Masechah Zvachim, it's kosher. However, it's not all the Ba'al Hashem Chav. He has to bring a different animal for Shlamim. However, you could offer on the Mizbeach. It's just not fulfilling his obligation. It's eaten for 1 day. And like we said, like before, you don't have to bring lechem and lo zera because this is not a korban to complete his nazir. It's not l'shem chov. It's not for his nazir. It's just a different regular shlamim. V'lo zera. Finally, the Brisa adds in something about the right foreleg, which is unique by a nazir, and that doesn't need zera. Meaning, presumably, it means. Well, the article says v'lo zera means. He says, lo zroa, that it's not cooked together the rest of the meat, which is normally true by a Nazir, and it is not waved. It, according to the article, it is, however, given to a Kohen. Tosos Rosh Ri, which is the Rishita, is given to a Kohen. Like he always says, you give it to the Kohen. Even though it says lo zroa, it just means it's not cooked with the rest of the animal when you cook it after you shecht it. And it's not waved. However, it is going into a Kohen. Can't be eaten by Yisrael. However, the Rambam, like we saw, argues, the Rambam says, no, it's eaten by Yisrael. We'll talk more about this in a second. The Gemara answers the reason I didn't mention this as one of the four cases. The four cases we're talking about where everything was done kehilchasa, was done the normal way. Shalakum mitzvasan, that's a big change when you offer an animal with the wrong intention. You shechta l'shem ola, so that wasn't included because it's not similar to the other four cases where the normal halachas and zeros should apply. It's just there was an unfortunate onus which happened, which didn't allow it to come to its completion. That's the conclusion of today's shiur. Stay tuned, Re'im Ben Sion, where I talk about this machlokas between the Ri and the Rambam, which really comes out from this last line over here. This is the first time we had four cases, and in this fifth case, right, it says this is the first time it says lo lechem v'lo zroa. Right. Seemingly, the other rice is implied. There is zroa. The zroa does apply. We'll talk more about the difference and how I would like to view this halacha. Do I side like the Ri or the Rambam? I'll tell you my hachra, my decision. Ian Ben Sion coming up next.